Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being with us today for our 30-minute Ask Me Anything webinar on National Consumer Education Resources to help states and PDG grantees. This webinar is part of a larger consumer education webinar series hosted by the State Capacity Building Center. And I know many of you have been with us on the previous webinars, and we thank you for continuing to learn with us through this journey. Today, we're going to walk through some questions that participants posed on the national webinar on this same topic 2 weeks ago today. We know you may have some additional questions as we go along, so we encourage you to put them in the chat box. And if there's time at the end, we'll answer those questions, and we'll certainly keep those questions in mind as we post our questions and answers to the session. We will also include the PowerPoint slides from this webinar and the webinar from 2 weeks ago on our website that I have posted in the chat box as well. So before we get started, I'd like to do some introductions. I'm Karen Ruprecht with the State Capacity Building Center, and today I'm joined by Richard, or actually Richard is not with us today, but Jim Lesko from Atlas Research, who will talk about the PDG Birth Through 5 perspective on this. Prete Washington with the National Center on After School and Summer Enrichment, and Jennifer Drake with the National Center on Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. Before we get started with our questions and answers from our guests today, we want to take a quick poll and find out who you all are to see who's on the webinar with us today. So if you could just take a moment and select the role that fits you best, your community member, direct child serving practitioner, family, state government professional, training and technical assistance professional. You can just take a moment to fill that out so we can see who's in the room. It's always nice to know who we're talking to here today. So it looks like we have a few more state government professionals with us today, and we have some training and technical assistant professionals. And we also have some university staff, so that's great that we have some university staff with us here today. So thanks for taking the time on doing that poll. We'll flip back to the PowerPoint. Great, thank you, Violetta. So we're going to start our question and answer portion of this, and I want to start off with having each of our speakers respond to a broad question that came up in the webinar from 2 weeks ago. Some of our participants on that webinar, and I know some of you were probably on that webinar as well, indicated that they work at the state level, but they also may work directly with child care providers or those that do direct service to professionals that serve young children and families. So my broad question is this: how do we support families and child care providers with consumer education and engagement information? And I'm going to ask Jennifer Drake to start us off. Jennifer?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Karen, and thanks to everyone who's participating today. I am Jennifer Drake from the National Center on Parent, Family, Community Engagement, or NCPFCE for short. And I'd like to answer that question and start us off with sharing with you some information that NCPFCE recently learned from talking with a group of parents about the importance of messaging consumer education information to families. We recently convened a group of parents to talk about consumer education and consumer education websites, and one of the messages that emerged from this group was how much they appreciated welcoming messages that conveyed appreciation for their important roles as the expert on their child and family. I'm hearing just a little bit of an echo there. And regardless of their children's ages, what we heard from them is that prominent strength-based messages can go a long way toward making them feel welcome and excited about exploring the content on a consumer education website. I'm sorry, If you're listening through your phone, please mute your computer speakers. Okay, thanks. So an example of that kind of message would be, you are the expert on your child and family. Look for a child care provider who asks for and respects your input. And NCPSCE's Consumer Education website guide to creating a family-friendly experience resource has many more examples of these kinds of strengths-based messages.
That's really important information to hear, Jennifer. And I think we probably all feel like strengths-based messages is perhaps a given, that we should always start with that. But I think it's really important and powerful to hear that from families. That's important. So thank you for sharing that. What are some other ways we can support families with consumer education and engagement information?
I think one thing we can do to support families is to ensure consumer education and engagement information, whether it's something on the website, a social media post, or a printed brochure, is written in plain language. And by that I mean that the information is clear and concise, and it's written as we speak. We want people to be able to find the information they're looking for and then be able to use what they find. And there are a couple of resources that can help with plain language. One resource that states and territories can use is plainlanguage.gov. This website provides guidelines, examples, and free online training for states and territories to use. And the information on this site provides information that can help us write clearly. You can also find plain language tips in NCPSCE's Foundations for Quality series. Specifically, the Consumer Education website guide to creating a family-friendly experience resource that I mentioned earlier, and our Consumer Engagement Using Social Media to Engage Families resource. The tips in these resources are based on the federal plain language guidelines, and they're tailored to include specific early childhood and school-age care and education examples. You can also learn about research related to reading levels and find tips on readability in these guides.
Thanks, Jennifer. Again, that's really helpful information to hear. I know on our past webinars we've referenced plainlanguage.gov, but it's always a good reminder because there could be some new people on the line that are hearing this for the first time. And it's really great to hear that there's resources that the NCPSC has developed that specifically addresses this. All of these resources, just in case you are wondering, will be listed at the end of the webinar and will also be posted on our website.
So good afternoon. This is Jim, and I'm going to need some help moving the slides. I've had a computer crash on my end, so it's my turn to have a computer issue this time. So if you all don't mind helping switch slides for me, that would be much appreciated. Great, thanks so much. I'm going to add to what Jennifer shared about using plain language. And here's an example of something which we would not want to say would be a somewhat wordy example of an attempt to explain something using much more complicated language than is necessary, especially when working with a variety of populations. And so rather than using this long example that you see on your left-hand side, it's much more helpful to look to the right-hand side and say it in a much more succinct manner and using terminology that's much more likely to be understood by a larger, diverse population. We know that it's very important to use an 8th grade reading level especially working and providing language to the general public. It's easier to read, and aiming for a 6th grade level, especially when focusing on content for parents, is very important. The NCPFCE guide on using social media to engage families has a lot of these tips, and I would encourage those who are most interested to go to that resource. It's a very valuable resource that we have shared with quite a number of our preschool development grantees. Everybody also most likely has available a readability test on the software on your computer. There's a test called the Flesch-Kincaid readability test that would be helpful to you in exploring the readability level of the content that you've created. Most people can find this readability test on your word processing software. I know that I use WordPerfect and a Word, I'm sorry, giving my age away, Word, and there is under the word count section, there is that readability capability. So if you use plain language and using the lower reading level, it's helpful to use shorter sentences and words with fewer syllables, such as the example that you see up on the screen. I'd also like to add that another way to support families with consumer education is to have information that is both culturally and linguistically appropriate. And we're hoping that everybody thinks about this as they're developing their written material. One area that we highlight in our PDG work when we talk about maximizing parental choice is addressing the issues of cultural and linguistic capabilities of the families and the populations that you're working with. One way to help with ensuring that information is culturally and linguistic appropriate for the audience that you're creating materials for, and to making sure that you work with the same population of people as you create those materials.
Thanks, Jim. That's helpful to have those guidelines in mind, both the Flesch-Kincaid reading test and also to thinking about, how can we make our engagement materials culturally and linguistically responsive to the populations that we serve. It really can be difficult to write at that 6th grade level, and I know many of you on the webinar probably have tried to do that, and you're surprised sometimes when those readability tests come back and it's maybe the 9th or 10th or 11th grade level or higher. But it's really important to check your written materials out before you post something on the website or send something out to families. Also, I'd like to remind everyone that some states and territories may have guidance or regulations on the reading level of material that is presented to the public. So be sure to check your state or territory agency guidelines before you create consumer education materials to make sure you are following those guidelines. So now I'd like to shift again and talk about ways we can support providers with consumer education information. Prate, what are some things that NCASE has that can support providers that work with the school-age population?
Sure. I always like to start with a reminder about that uniqueness of school-age care. During the year, children are in school, and so a lot of times school-age care, it can come in pieces. It can be before school, after school, a combination of those, during a break. As parents who work or in school, we don't get 2 weeks off, which would be awesome, or during the summer. And so when we talk about consumer education for school age, it's important to remind families about why these pieces of time are still important and how they play a role in supporting children's growth and development instead of being just like holding places when children are not in school. During the webinar a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the summer slide. There's data, and we've learned that during the summer, children that do not have access to quality care for, school-age care struggle when they come back to school. And over time, that disparity can grow. And so it's important, when we give families information to help make that important decision about child care, that we really focus on why those times are important. And so the school-age consumer education toolkit that we shared before is a really good resource, and it actually complements the resources that we learned about earlier from the National Center for Parent, Family, and Community Engagement. The toolkit has really easy-to-digest resources that help deliver that message about the role of school-age care, and the toolkit also has examples of what other programs and what other states are doing are always really, really helpful, and they can demonstrate what quality school-age childcare looks like. And so with the arrival of summer, the toolkit has been updated with that Spotlight on Summer tab, and it has additional information and resources specific to these summer months. It also includes some tip sheets that we shared in the previous webinar, and families can use that information to educate themselves about, activities and ways to support their children during the summer. They can use that information to inform themselves on what to look for when looking for a program, and then providers can use the information to support their services and what information that they share with families.
Thanks, Prate. I spent some time looking at your Spotlight on Summer toolkit and your resources, and they're really phenomenal. So if those of you on the webinar haven't had a chance to check them out and you work with school-age providers, I really encourage you to check out these resources and share them widely with your school-age providers. I want to switch gears now and talk about how families find consumer education information when they're looking for childcare. So the state and territory consumer education website should have information for families on how to search for childcare for different age groups. What you're seeing on your screen right now is a screenshot from childcare.gov. And we talked a little bit about this in the webinar a couple of weeks ago. And childcare.gov can help families find their state's consumer education website and can also link them to their state's child care search page. And right up here we are just kind of showing the screenshot of if we were searching for Georgia's child care research page. Prate, do you have some information to add on this too?
I did. I was thinking, some states and territories may have information to search for childcare for different age groups, including school age. Some state and territory searches on the consumer education website may include a filter for searching by age. And if for those who are with us today, if your state or territory doesn't already do this, you might want to consider adding this to help enhance your zip code search. By including an age filter, that can broaden the child care options for families with school-age children, because sometimes searching just by program type, such as school-age programs, you might not include family child care providers who serve school-age children.
That's a really good point, Prate. Do you have some other ways that states and territories could incorporate school-age information in their consumer education website?
Yeah, we said school-age childcare is really critical for families, and we've learned, according to recent data, 45% or almost half of the children served by CCDF are school-age. And so enhancing that information about school-age can really provide really important information to families. And so in looking to ways to do that, states and territories can consider including that information about the age ranges the child care providers serve on their consumer education websites. They also might want to include information about transportation. Transportation is really important for families during the school year because we don't work 9 to 3, and also during the summer where I would love a summer vacation, but I don't have one. So, transportation information could really be really helpful, as well as including links to state after-school networks. That's a whole nother resource of really valuable information and resources around school-age childcare. And finally, for families with school-age children, we can encourage them to contact their local child care resource and referral agency, or YMCA, or even the Boys and Girls Club for information on school-age care. These programs often have information related to using CCDF vouchers to pay for child care.
Thanks, Prate. Again, really helpful information about how states and territories can include school-age information in their consumer education websites. And you'll see up here on the screen here, we're showing the screenshot from childcare.gov from Georgia's website, and you can, or on Georgia's page, and you can see on the page that the After School Association is linked for Georgia here. So I would encourage you to check out your state's page on childcare.gov, and if you have an After School Association or some information on school-age childcare, to consider including that as well. So I want to turn a little bit and talk about how difficult sometimes it can be for parents to find childcare. And I like to share some resources that are available to help you guide families when they can't find childcare, because this can be a very emotional time for parents when this situation may arise. And it can also be very frustrating. We think sometimes it's difficult to explain why this happens and to provide information and resources to help parents through this time. On childcare.gov, we have this page that's shown here on your screen that addresses this issue by providing options for families to consider, such as considering different options for childcare, staying in touch with a local childcare resource and referral agency, and looking for childcare in a different location that might have some more options. States and territories can use the information on this page on their website or in written materials to help families if they are facing this challenge. One thing I've learned a lot from our PDG Birth to 5 friends is thinking about how we can enhance and not necessarily duplicate some information. And here's a great way if you're looking for resources for parents when they can't find childcare. Feel free to use this information. So speaking of PDG Birth to 5, I'd like to circle back now on how we can collaborate with the PDG Birth to 5 grantees when enhancing our consumer education website. Jen, do you have some suggestions and ideas for us?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Yes, I do. So the Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 grants present a wonderful opportunity for states and territories to enhance their consumer education and engagement information. Many of the states and territories involved in working with these grants are enhancing their consumer education information through their state and local websites, social media, and through many other channels. So it would be helpful and important to partner where you can with your PDG B-5 grantee in your state or territory and help them enhance and not to duplicate the information that's already available on many of the OCC consumer education websites. What we've seen in a broad-based perspective on looking at the PDG B5 state websites that are already currently in existence are 6 consistent themes. The availability and linkage to child care, much of which has been mentioned already during this Q&A. The child development knowledge and information, links to that for parents and providers. Information for families on financial assistance for child care. Many sites have early signs and screening information and further linkages within their states to items such as the Ages and Stages questionnaire. Advocacy linkages for parents to be able to enable them to access services. And many websites have practitioner resources, linkages, and professional development. I'll turn it back to you. Sorry.
Great. Thank you, Jim. I appreciate the information that you've shared about the PDG Birth to 5 and how we can collaborate and, as you say, enhance and not duplicate some of the information that is already out there. There's a lot of great consumer education information out there, as I hope you've heard from the webinar today. So I'd like to thank Jennifer, Pate, and Jim for sharing your ideas on how to use these national consumer education resources to support work at the state level and with the PDG grantees. I'd like to remind everyone that we'll be posting these questions and answers, and we have a few more that we weren't able to get to in the next several days on our website that we've posted here in the chat box. To close out today, we have several polls that we'd like to share with you. So Violetta, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the first poll. And we'd like to ask you, how much has your understanding of national consumer education website improvements improved today? And we'll give you a minute or so to answer that poll. And your responses are really important to us because we do use this to think about how can we continually improve our processes and how can we deliver these webinars better and even more effectively to you. So we really do appreciate your taking the time to fill these out. And then the next poll is how likely are you to use one of these strategies or practices or even look at some of these products that we've mentioned today in your work? Great. And then our final poll is our open-ended question. If there's any other webinar topics that you would find useful, either in your work and if you're thinking about consumer education or even if it's even broader than consumer education. So if there's any other webinar topics, we'd love to hear from you. And again, we really do take your feedback quite seriously and try to feed this into additional webinars or thinking about how we can better deliver products and resources to the states and the territories. And if you do have ideas even after this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. In our closing, yeah, there we go. Sometimes it takes a minute for our technology to flip over. I'm sure everybody's experienced that in the past. I'd like to remind you of our next hot topic webinar, and this is on using data to inform your website. This is a really exciting webinar that we're putting on, and our user experience team will be the prime speakers on this webinar. So this is how do you use web engagement tools such as Google Analytics to really understand how consumers are using your website. And it's also talking about things, more technical terms like search engine optimization and how can you really on the back end help people find your consumer education website if they're exploring information on how to find child care. So we hope you join us, and if you are able to join us, please invite folks who work in your state or territory agency that work directly with the website. This one is a little bit more technical, but we explain it in a way that is very approachable, but some of your people that work directly on the website and in that technical aspect may really enjoy this webinar. So we really hope to see you again in July for that webinar. Here are some resources that you can go to and find from the ECPAS website, the Consumer Education Resource page, and the SCVC Consumer Education Webinar Series. And again, we will be posting this on our webinar, so you have easy access to this and can access this on your own. And here's our resources on plain language that many of you hopefully have seen before, and you're starting to use it a little bit more in your work. And then here's our screenshot of the ECPAS webpage on the National Resources. So we hope you use that as well. And we thank you for joining us today. We hope everyone has a wonderful 4th of July holiday next week, and we look forward to connecting with you on July 11th for our next webinar. Have a good day, everyone.